So one of the things that I know about the coalition in South Dakota is it's different than other coalitions in that it does have that scale across the state. And then also it's organized to have a response function, which isn't necessarily true for other coalitions. So for like those that might not know coalition models that well, or how coalitions might be different than healthcare provider organizations, talk a little bit about how the coalition is structured in South Dakota, including kind of the 501c3 status and how that's different.
Okay, so first off, the traditional model of a healthcare coalition is a planning structure. It's flawed in a way that we've seen this occur multiple times during activation and crisis, is all of these people come together and they plan together and they write all these plans together and they do all these drills together. And they work together very efficiently in practice. And then when a disaster comes, there's no structure for them to actually operate together. They all get called back into their cocoons of their facilities, and the communications net that has been created disappears. There really is no hardcore communication at all, and we saw that occur in South Dakota during H1N1. We saw it during Ebola, which wasn't as big of an event from a surge perspective, and we saw it absolutely happen during the COVID response. So during the COVID response, I was the vice president of the Healthcare Coalition, and it was then where I decided that we were going to change how things worked. So we restructured the coalition completely, and we kept the planning side because that worked, and then we created an area command model. We never had physical space before, so we went out and found physical space. We used some grant money that we had to buy technology, and we created a small area command, a NIMS compliant area command modeled after, not only the ASPR model for what healthcare coalition should look like, but also the FEMA model. So it has planning, logistics, and finance. There's no operations section because operations operate or exist in the field. We have a policy group. We have a patient tracking section, and we have a resource management section. And each one of those sections, as I'm talking to you, I'm visualizing them in the office. And my desk, my office desk, actually becomes the incident command desk. And there's a series of desktops. But each desktop in that room can broadcast to any of the TVs that we have on the walls. So we created through all Apple technology, so everything's connected through an Apple TV. So you can just pick which TV you want to go to and send it. We've been practicing this now for the 2 years since COVID has existed. And we activate on a very regular basis now. Like just 2 weekends ago, we had a blizzard, and we activate just for monitoring. And we've adopted, what you'll find interesting, I think, is we've adopted FEMA levels, emergency management levels. So we have a level 3, which is a monitoring level. We have a level 2, which is a partial activation. We have a level 1, which is full activation. But then we have this 1C level, which we did some research on what is disaster. So Il Quarantelli, who, I'm Il Quarantelli's biggest fan. Il Quarantelli did a lot of pondering and philosophical thinking regarding what is disaster, and disaster versus catastrophe. Mm-hmm. And the summary difference is the lack of infrastructure. So, with 9/11, when we were responding to the World Trade Center event, we had infrastructure. We were able to bring all of our supplies right to the edge of the disaster, and bring those all in and then leave at the end of the day, or at the end of a shift. Where in Katrina, there was no edge of disaster; it was all disaster. So infrastructure is gone, and even during Hurricane Ian, you saw fire services that were underwater and so on. Just recently here in Florida. So what we do with the level 1C is we ensure our healthcare infrastructure is in place first before we go operational, because we can't provide services for victims if we don't have any place to provide those services.
So is that the delineating factor then in your mind based on his research, which has endured really, right? Because this is his research. But really informed a lot of our thinking early in our career. So,
it's kind of like gospel,
right? So it's really endured. But is that the definition really then between a disaster response and a catastrophic event is the failure or loss of infrastructure.
I think so. Yeah, I think that when you have a disaster and you have the capability to respond to a disaster, you're still moving in the right direction. When you have no infrastructure and you have no capability anymore, you're part of the disaster. So yeah, I think that is, instead of being a responder, you become a victim. And I think that is clearly the dividing line.
Now, your disaster experience goes back a bit. You referenced 9/11.
Little bit, yeah.
Yeah. You want to tell us a little bit about how you entered the field of emergency management and your experience with 9/11 and how that played a role in that?
Well, I got into this by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. My first disaster ever was the Avianca crash. I believe it was like 1989, 1990, that ran out of fuel, and it landed in John McEnroe's backyard on Long Island. And I wasn't a paramedic at the time. I was in EMS, maybe a year. And we responded to the Avianca crash. And what was unique about that crash was there were actually 71 survivors. So we spent the night extricating people from that aircraft. I found out later from a pilot that I know, one of the most studied aircraft incidents, at least at that time when he was becoming a pilot, because it was all based on a communications era and the failure of the pilots who didn't speak English as a first language, to declare a emergency rather than just being low on fuel. So they did not declare a fuel emergency, and they were in a holding pattern over Long Island waiting to land, I believe, at LaGuardia. But yeah, that would be the one that most of us who have moved on, I would call us the New York City dinosaurs, would have been probably one of our first incidents. That, along with the 14th Street train crash, subway crash, would be around some of those first large-scale incidents that we experienced. So Avianca, yeah, that was my breakthrough into the world of disaster, and I had zero clue as to what to do. Like, nobody really knows what to do. You get all this training in mass casualty and disaster, you never think it's going to happen. And I remember coming over the hill. It was in a very hilly area, and it was a one-lane road going up. Coming over the top of the hill and seeing this plane laying there, because of the way the land presented itself, you didn't see the crash till you're almost on top of it, and it was literally like walking into a movie set. Wow. It was completely surreal. And then the hilltop, it had been raining. The whole getting up to the top, we were working up where the cockpit or the front of the plane cracked off. And we were trying to work our way into the second third of the fuselage to get people out. And I remember, just a quick story, I remember lifting a piece of airplane to move it out of the way and realizing how light it was. Like, feeling really strong because I had like half an airplane in my hand. And then I just kind of like threw it down the hill. And then we were able to get into that aircraft. Yeah, that was my first incident. And then by accident, I usually worked in the afternoon because I ran the paramedic program at St. Vincent's Hospital.
Which was the hospital that was closest to what is now known as Ground Zero.
Yeah, the closest trauma center to Ground Zero. So I used to teach ACLS to to paramedics and to physicians, and I was coming in early that Tuesday to do an ACLS class, because I usually didn't come in until 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because I taught the paramedic class at night. And so I remember, like, it's one of those weird things where they've done all this research on people who have been through disaster and how you have, depending on the circles, they do circles of distance, that you have video memory of the day. Like, to this day, 20 some odd years later, I remember everything, and how it actually drove some of the initiatives that I work on from an academic perspective. But I came out of the subway and I was getting coffee. There was a guy on the corner who was from Syria. He owned this little coffee thing. Like, and if you're from New York, everybody knows there's coffee trucks around the corner, and they have the best coffee in the city, And so he knew, like, he would see me online. He would always know I would get a glazed donut and a cup of coffee. They always have it ready. And I walked up to him that day and I was like, "How's it going, brother?" We called each other brother. And he used to always tell me about his family in Syria and how he was trying to get his family here. And while we were talking, fire trucks were going by. And I remember, and I don't know why, because it would be on a regular day, you wouldn't remember, a high-rise unit going downtown. And I remember seeing our our safety officer running toward the hospital. And I thought, well, maybe our behavioral health facility is on fire, because the behavioral health patients would always light fires in the garbage cans and stuff like that. And then I turned around the corner to walk down 7th Avenue to where my office was, and I saw these people standing in the middle of the street. And I walked out, because what else do you do, right? I walked out into the middle of 7th Avenue and then saw the tower on fire with a giant hole in it. And somebody was like, it got hit by a Cessna. And I was like, there is no way that thing got hit by, like, I didn't see the plane hit it. I just saw the big fire and the hole.
And at that point, I'm curious, did you think that it was an accident, or did you think at what point did you realize it was actually a terrorist event?
My first thought was the pilot was drunk. This is the first thing that hit me in the head, was like, there had been some stuff in the news about pilots drinking around that time, or something was stuck in my head about pilots drinking. And I was like, oh my God, who hits a building? Like the biggest building in New York, like who hits a building? And so I didn't think terrorist attack, even though we had been trained about terrorist attacks from 1995 into 2001, and we had been training for that. Then what popped into my head was, well, maybe someone hacked into the instrument landing systems that are kind of like, as far as I understand, how the ground control aircraft coming in and out, and they were given wrong radar coordinates or something. Like terrorist attack, guys taking over a plane and flying into a building didn't hit me in the head at all. So I walked inside, and when I came out, this guy from Environmental Services grabbed me and he said, another plane just hit the other building. And my response was, oh, come on now, let's not start rumors, because they teach us, in emergency management, rumor control. And I walked down to the middle of the street, and it was immediately knew at that point that this was intentional, and and the rest is in the history books. But it wasn't really until then where it clicked into my brain that this was actually an intentional event that was well orchestrated, and we were in the middle of it, and and the next thing you think of is what next. So we did a lot of things that you wouldn't think of. Like, we took the flag down, the St. Vincent's flag down from in front of the hospital, and shut the lights off of the sign on top of the hospital, thinking that if they were looking to, because we hear about secondary attacks, and we thought we were a secondary target. And we were like trying to shut down the street. And I'll never forget this cop. There was this one cop. One cop was assigned to our facility, and he was directing traffic, because they were trying to get nothing but emergency vehicles down. So it was stopping traffic. And I asked him if we were at 12th Street, and I said, can you go to 14th Street and block it from there? Because that way it's two-way. And if you can block it at 14th Street, it'll protect us. And he's looking at me, but he's not functioning. And I'm going, dude, I need you to go to 14th Street. And he looked at me and he screamed at me, and he's like, I can't find my fucking keys. I'm like, okay, when you find your keys. Like, he was completely with it, but not with it.
Yep.
So he was.
And you see that, right? I mean, obviously, over the last 20 plus years since then, right? When you can disaster zones, you see that, right? That people go into that freeze state.
Yep.
And it's just everyone's individual kind of trauma response. And yeah, you think that we're immune to it as, even responders or emergency managers or clinicians, or, in this case, right, police, fire, it can happen to any of us. So what did you do? How did you respond?
I walked away because he had a gun, and I didn't. So I was like, he didn't threaten me with his gun, but like, he's a guy with a gun who's not necessarily thinking straight right now. Right. He's just not right. So I'm just going to walk away. And we had this crossing guard for the school near St. Vincent. She wanted to be close to St. Vincent. So I approached her and I said, can you do me a favor? And can you go up to 14th Street and block traffic at 14th Street? And she was like spot on, right on it. And she was the one that, until everything got organized, who started protecting us. Like, she was literally, as I saw walking up the street, blocking cars and jumping in front of them and making them, go up the side streets and stuff.
Incredible, but also a testament as well, which we oftentimes, I think, overlook in disasters, is how in those early moments and hours of an event, how important citizen-based response is, and and leveraging the very people who are actually directly impacted by the event.
It makes it work.
Yeah.
We don't consider in our planning how much people do, but when you look at disaster, and I've done case studies on numerous mass casualty incidents, it's those early interventions. Las Vegas is a perfect example. Most of the patients transported were transported by private means. Even the guy in the stolen truck, he stole a truck to.
I've not heard that actually.
He was a military dude. There was a truck running. He jumped in the truck and started throwing people in the truck and driving them to the hospital. Somewhere along the line, I heard that he had always wanted a truck, and someone bought him a truck. Like some car dealer gave him a truck after that for his heroics, because he was under fire apparently at the time and whatever. But we really underestimate. In fact, we try to control civilian response to disaster by trying to keep them out of the loop almost. Like, they're going to get in the way. They're going to get in the way, but they really don't. Like when you look at Katrina and the role of the Cajun Navy, which I didn't even know that they existed until I started studying the impact of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and how they were evacuating people. And it's all civilians with boats just coming together as a group.
Happens in earthquakes as well, right?
Everywhere you go, people step up, and you're right. You made a really good point before. So first responders, we don't like to consider this, but we're human. My personal experience that day for the first 2 hours, which led to the academic research that I've been doing since 9/11, was that I lost all sense of time. Like, time for me stopped. Like, I knew everything that I was doing. I was on autopilot. I was disconnected, but I had a memory of everything that I did, but I could not put it in chronological order for years. It drove me crazy. Like, why can't I remember the order in which I did things? I can tell you everything that I did. And it wasn't until I was living in South Dakota where the fire department or somebody released all of the audio of the radio communication from 9/11 for EMS and fire. And I was sitting in my office in South Dakota listening to Manhattan South Radio, which is what I was listening to that day. It was phenomenal that I remembered where I was for every radio broadcast. Like, I had my radio on my hip the whole time, not paying attention to it, but paying attention to it. If I had never heard those tapes again, I would still be struggling with the fact that I don't know why I didn't remember things in the way I did.
Did you find it helpful, hard, or both to hear the sequence of those communications? Because I know for me, when I'm in the moment, just as you're kind of talking, right? You're not thinking about time. It's not a spatial experience, right? You're just very sort of focused on the task at hand. But then later on, when I see footage or I listen to, you're talking about Las Vegas. So when I was listening to the radio communications of the Las Vegas shootings afterwards, of course, I'm like crying, right? I'm in a conference room listening to the replaying of this. And things, and I'm right, and so I have a very emotional reaction to those things I find later. What was it like for you to hear all of that afterwards?
For me, it was a eye-opening experience to hear it again and to be able to put it all into place. It was a heartbreaking experience to relive it again. And my penance for being a 9/11 responder is that I will, anytime I'm ever asked to speak about it at a conference or whatever, even though it's 20 years later, I will, because reliving it is therapeutic in a way. And I don't think it matters that you cry. Like, we're all supposed to be macho all the time, but I think guys have a tendency to not show emotion. But I think that I've always found the ability to go there in your head, think through it again is therapeutic. We build walls around things that change us. I'm a different person than I was on September 10th, 2001. I'm a different Greg Santa Maria. But some good, some bad, I'm motivated to figure out better ways to help decision makers decision make and be aware of these disconnects that occur and the different layers of fight, flight, or freeze that actually occur with us, first responders who think it doesn't impact us. But therapeutically, it was, it went in two directions. It was great and it sucked.
So one of the things that I'm, focusing on in these interviews and interested in hearing from people is what makes us resilient, particularly in the face of enduring these kinds of experiences, and then also the planning and response work that we do, where we oftentimes, right, like throughout my career, we've responded to a lot of disasters. It informs the research you're doing now and have done as part of your doctoral work, and the way in which you're designing the plans and so forth. It's not theory for us. This, right? This is, we know what it means to do this in a way where it has to work, right? It's not just philosophical. It matters. What have these experiences taught you, or what is it that you think that are some of the building blocks of resilience as other people are trying to learn from your experiences, whether it's an individual or an organization, right? People hear me say this all the time. Organizations are made up of people. So
Right.
Resilient organizations need to be made up of resilient people. So how do we get there? What does resilience in the face of all this look like to you?
Well, it's actually two things. I've been thinking about this. And the best way I can define it is resilience is not having the ability to say we can't do something. We had a conversation, a minor conversation, which helped me think about this a little bit recently, as recently as last night, about living in a box. I have lived most of my life outside the box. We're forced to as people who respond to disasters. Nothing about disaster is normal. The first training that I ever got from the Department of Defense under the Nunn-Lugar-Dominici grants when the DoD came was, and it stayed with me all these years, is the instructor came in, and we had a blackboard at the time, if you can believe it. They existed back then. He drew a square on the board, and he said, "This is your comfort zone." And he said, and everything that we're going to do over the next 2 weeks in training you is going to be outside this box. And you need to be used to never being inside your box, because all of these things that occur will occur outside your comfort zone. In defining resilience, you have to realize that nothing is ever going to happen in your comfort zone. Because it's not happening in your comfort zone, your first impression will be, we don't know how to manage this. We don't have a plan for this. Being resilient is finding a way to say, yeah, we can do this, regardless of what that is. And as you think of what resilience is, it is a dynamic process that defines the new normal in real time. You're analyzing all of this shit that is occurring, and you are defining the new normal minute by minute by minute by minute. And it all ties together. And we just recently had this conversation. Continuity of operations planning is not really separate from emergency operations planning. It was just designed that way for one reason or another. Resilience is not really separate from that. It's all tied together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our team talks about this all the time, and the term that we've come to use most frequently is not just resiliency, but actually integrated resiliency. And when talking about our area of work specifically within healthcare is integrated healthcare resiliency. So it's not these standalone puzzle pieces, right? It's not even the connection of those puzzle pieces. It's truly taking the greater whole and then integrating it. Really identifying the systems and the cross sections and the efficiencies for, in our case, the best possible way to provide safe care for patients, no matter what.
And it's interesting because a lot of healthcare systems don't realize how much resource they have, because they define resource in such a weird way, or in such a, it's more of a day-to-day operational way. And here's an example. We have ophthalmology clinics, we have dermatology clinics, and so on. And those are the first ones that you're going to shut down. But what you have in those clinics is physicians. When we were working through H1N1, and we were, and luckily H1N1 didn't really result in the in-hospital surge that we expected more than it resulted in clinic surge, but we were seeing a little bit of a pressure on keeping clinics open later and longer. and they needed doctors. And, so the dermatologist is like, well, I'm a dermatologist. And my response in the command center was, well, did he go to med school? Can he work a stethoscope? Can he take a blood pressure? Get him over to the clinic. Like, the dermatology clinic's closed. He doesn't get to go home. Like, none of us get to go home. So I think that becoming resilient is one of the things is knowing how much resource you have. And if you shut that resource down, you can reallocate it. And I don't think it's done to the maximum capability, because it's not integrated resilience yet. I don't think we're there. So, as the emergency management person, and I think healthcare emergency managers are probably, and I'll put this caveat in there, probably the most insane person in the command center that is pressed to deal with the insanity that the command center is experiencing. And because we have that level of insanity, we can actually understand the concept of what is occurring and perceive what is happening in that way. I don't really know what makes us tick, because we certainly are different. And what's funny about it is that your command center doesn't seem to operate without you being there. It's like we're the one gear in the middle that makes all the other gears move. And it's our job. I think it's our job to really push the rest of our team to take it more and more and more seriously. Like, they can't just rely on Greg Santa Maria. Oh, well, if this happens, we'll call Greg and he'll find all the solutions.
So I want to dig a little deeper on that and challenge you a little bit in that role, that expertise is central to the overall operations. And in the example you're using, the command center, is this not also an opportunity to build on your second statement for us as leaders to do a better job of knowledge transfer and engagement so that the command center can function without us, so the program can function without us?
Well, the best emergency management leader is a leader who can have a command center work in his absence or her absence. Absolutely. Yes, it is our role. To answer your question, our ability to become more integrated within our C-suite, within our leadership, and so on. And this is what I'm speaking about tomorrow at this conference is, how to get integrated, how to, what does the emergency manager need? But what does the emergency manager need to do? You can do all the drills you want with your ER staff and all this, but when it really hits the fan, you're going to be sitting in a room with your CEO and your president and your COO and your chief nursing officers and chief medical officers, and they're going to be the ones making decisions. If you haven't worked with them, you're going to be doing training on the fly in the middle of a crisis.
Well, they're the ones who are accountable. The burden of responsibility rests with us to understand also from their perspective of what it means. They manage risk every day, all day. Right? Risks beyond natural hazards and the things that we might think of as emergency managers. It's why I'm actually such an advocate more for the integrated resiliency model and baking in that continuity planning, because that's language that resonates with them. And then you're always bringing it back, and you're not waiting for the black smoking hole scenario, right? The normal operations to, oh my gosh, right? We'd have to declare a disaster. There's a whole host of risks that occur in that spectrum between here and there that leaders deal with every day. So I think that it's an opportunity for us to engage with them there so that that partnership and those relationships and that trust and the ability to be seen as an advisor and coach to that leadership team so that they feel like they can confidently make the right decisions for the organization when they are facing a crisis.
And it's up to us to bring that knowledge to them. I don't know that they know to seek it out all the time, like in their regular day. When I train new emergency managers, one thing that I say to them is, listen, you always need to consider yourself as that command center is a football team, and you're the coach. Their quarterback, your incident commander, is making the decisions on the field, but you know the playbook. And you need to meet with them and you need to train them in the playbook. You need to teach them what to do, and you need to be annoying. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten on calendars of execs, of CEOs and CMOs and all of that and saying, I need to speak to you for a half an hour, knowing that they have an attention span of about 6 minutes. In the first 6 or 8 minutes, you need to be succinct enough to say, I need you to know this because When it hits the fan, you're going to be sitting in the room across from me, looking at me for guidance, and the guidance is sitting here right now. I built an ESF-based plan for my last organization. It was, what I think it worked. We took some of the ESFs, obviously it didn't fit, but we kept the ESFs and we added some ESFs. And instead of teaching them the whole plan, I met with them for half an hour and said, "There's this big plan, and here's your part of the plan. This is all you need to know when you come in the room. I'm going to look at you and say, I'm not going to ask you to go outside of what this part of the plan is, and this is all you need to know."
The point that you're making, though, is about when you're talking with the leader and saying, this is the thing you need to know, or these are the three things you need to know, I think is actually a great strategy when working with leaders around this, right? Is all the things that we're doing, they just need to know the piece that is relevant to them. I also think about the piece that you and I were exchanging emails about in terms of also just like communicating with people, and the wisdom that I received from one of my bosses, years, probably 25 years ago now, Ed Swartz. And he had said to me, like, when you're communicating something, you just need to be able to explain current state, future state, and how you're going to get there. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And so no matter what you're doing, if you're kind of able to communicate when working with leaders, trying to create that engagement, if you can zero in your points on those things, you can actually probably get it down to that 6 minutes.
And I'm a traditional whiteboarder. My old office was surrounded by whiteboards, and in my command centers, I have whiteboards. And when something needs to be done, I will get up to the whiteboard and do exactly that. Where do we need to be? Where are we now? And what do we need to do to get there?
Yeah.
Like, let's throw all these little boxes up, and then all the people sitting around the table who have a role in this particular objective, pay attention. And I want you guys to give me input on, if we need to do this, how do we do it? Like clinical nursing, medicine, supply chain. All of those people need to be around the table. But I've talked to them, letting them know that, again, there will be a time where I'll call on you, and it's going to be in a room full of leaders when it's hitting the fan, when you're most stressed out, and everyone is anxious.
Based on all of these experiences, what is probably the most important thing you think you've learned in your career?
You need to be patient. Everybody's different. I think that we need to realize that we ourselves are human beings, and we hit this before, that we have thresholds, but so do other people. And we need, when you get back to that cop at the beginning of this conversation, he has an important role, but if he's not focused on that role, or he's disconnected, we need to do things to bring people back to ground. Am I grounded enough to do this? And if not, how do I ground myself, which is part of a lot of the research that I've done academically. But how do I ground the people around me? You have to be the calm in the storm. Our role is for people to look at, this is how I sit in the command center. I am leaning back. I purposefully sit in a relaxed position. I'm not leaning over the table. I'm not tense. I purposely sit in a relaxed position away from the table, and listen. And when people look at me, they're like, he's not even bothered by this. Like he's just taking it all in, and it rubs off. When COVID hit March 10th, when this organization that I worked for opened their command center, March 10th of 2020, I was in Florida doing post-evacuation work, doing incident command training at this facility, and I had a 2-week stay in Florida planned, with training the first week and a full-scale exercise with all of Osceola County the second week. And I was there for 2 days, where I got the phone call. I was on my morning command call. I got a phone call saying that they're opening up command and they need you back, like, right away. And I'm like, well, we have a big drill coming up, and our organizational system is designed to operate in my absence. And there's literally 3 cases of coronavirus. I'm in Florida right now. There's 3 cases. I think there were 3 cases in Tampa. The first 3 cases were in the Tampa area. And I'm like, there's really nothing for us to worry about right this second. I could do all my work from here. And they insisted. I flew back that next morning, and I got back into Sioux Falls around noon. When I walked into the command center, the relieved faces that Greg Santamaria was in the room, was it was like you could see it. But the funny part about it is I didn't do anything for the next 2 weeks. I sat there. So I think the most important thing is to get your leadership to the point that you're at. If the person they rely on the most is not in a state of relaxation in the middle of crisis, it's gonna make the crisis worse. And it's a learned skill. It's something that we do, and it's something that we just need to be. We need to coach our team and make sure that they keep their heads in the game.
Well, and part of that is us building our own resilience, right? It's really like in my work, my reading and research and writing is starting to learn what those pillars of resilience are and how much that truly starts with ourselves. It's kind of like the expression, right? If you want peace in the world, you have to start with yourself, right? So it's I think the same is true for our resilience. It's much more challenging, I think, for us to declare that everyone else needs to be resilient if we are not investing in building that resilience within ourselves. Same is true if we're resilient, that ability to remain calm in the face of crisis is much more likely. And then people can look to us as you said, sort of that calm in the storm.
And we do, we spoke about this before, we've got to work on ourselves. We have to make sure that we are focused on maintaining our own space. And how are we reacting? What can we do to bring ourselves to ground? We need to ground. And if we're not grounded, then, everything short circuits. So it does absolutely positively starts with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So final question to build on what you're sharing for those that are watching. Based on your experiences personally, professionally, is there one thing that you would want them to know?
I think that it's more of a personal, spiritual thing than it is organizational structure or anything. Is that the role that we're in is a gift. It may not seem that way. I believe we're chosen by some higher power to be where we are, because I never chose this path. I didn't choose to be sitting here today talking about all of these experiences. They all just happened while I was there. And it's something clearly told me that this is your calling. And I'll share a personal experience with you that I rarely share. But Ted Wilson was the chaplain from Oklahoma City fire. And he came, I called Oklahoma City right, I guess on September 12th or September 13th to get some insight from a perspective of they were the only ones that had any experience in a big terrorist attack in the United States prior to 9/11. With a building collapse and everything, and we were asking questions about survival and infections and air and dust and everything else, and we got the first response I got was, "We have not been officially asked by the city of New York to participate." I said, "Well, I'm asking you, as the emergency manager from St. Vincent's Hospital, we need your help." They connected me with a bunch of people, and Teddy Wilson was one of those people, and he kept me on the phone for 4 hours. Like, if you can imagine me actually talking for 4 hours, but he kept me on the phone for 4 hours. And halfway through, I realized he was literally diffusing me. And I caught him, and I was like, "Listen, I know what you're doing here." I said, "You're diffusing me." He's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." So he wound up coming out with a FEMA team in October of that year. And he came out to my house for dinner. And then he said to me the next day, he said, "I need you to give me a ride to Ground Zero, because I have to meet some people down there." So I brought him down to Ground Zero, and we were kind of just standing there. And it was actually the first time that I had been there as not a responder, that I had just been there to look. And I'm standing next to him, and I hear, like, I'm lost. I completely was lost in the moment, looking around at the damage and like what I'd never seen before as a spectator. And I heard in my brain the beeping of a crane, but it was somewhere different. I was completely dissociated from the minute. And Teddy's hitting me because the crane was coming around with a giant hunk of metal and it was heading in our direction. But I was lost in the moment. I was like brought back to wherever I was. And his words to me is what I'm getting at. He said, you need to tell people what happened here. He said, you survived for a reason. And I'm getting chills talking about this right now. And this is why I don't talk about it. He said, but what happened here can never happen again. And it's people like you who are going to make that difference. And that's the most important thing. And I'm trying not to cry. But that spoke volumes to me. It spoke volumes to me. And I think that's the most important thing, is that we are chosen to be those people. We don't ask for it. But if people are getting into this world, this is what we get. And this is who we are. So
Thank you. Because your work since then has mattered.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. I wish it could matter more, but we do what we can.